Hey guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I've learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. And my husband just got home, and he's tired, and I'm tired, but I wanted to make a video on this channel today. So I want to do a couple meditations on here, or one. I haven't read these meditations. This is the stack of the meditation books that I leave to do for videos now, and then I have a couple others that I read in the morning. So these are special. They're specifically for this channel. So I have the Healing After Loss, Living in Balance, Linda Picone's Daily Book of Positive Quotations, and Language of Letting Go, and Journey to the Heart. So let's just grab one and see what speaks to us today. Are you ready? Okay, September 9th. September 9th. Wasn't there a song like, oh, the Ides of September? Do you guys remember that? I feel like my mom used to always sing that song. Okay, September 9th. Failing better. Ever tried, ever failed. No matter, try again. Fail again, fail better. Samuel Beckett. We will fail more often than we care to think. We can learn from our failures, and we're still going to fail in the future. The key is to fail in new ways, not to keep repeating the failures we've already experienced. I won't get discouraged by failure, but I will try to make sure that when I fail, it's because of something new, not because I'm stuck in a rut. I think it's a really fantastic meditation, and you know, it's interesting, I was just talking about this on my drama channel. I was talking about the idea of, you know, I really believe that you learn so much from the mistakes in your life that you make, you know, if you're open to that. But you have to be open to it first, you know, the whole idea of falling on your face and getting back up. And, you know, I think it's something that I've really embraced in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, specifically the last 2 years. I think that it's not so much to me how I approach something that I failed in. I don't even necessarily love the word failure. I have to say that I prefer like learning experience or, you know, mistakes that I've made, things like that. I think that failure is, you know, a pretty ambiguous term, you know, to say, and it's also finite. I mean, ambiguous and finite at the same time, you know. Friends of mine that have gone through divorce, they'll say to me, I just feel like my marriage was such a failure. And that always hurts my soul for them, you know, because from the time that you meet somebody and the time that you get into a relationship, and then you're in this relationship for, you know, 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and then it ends in divorce, you go your separate ways, does not mean that the entirety of the relationship was a failure, you know? Which is why I often say, when people ask me relationship questions on here, to look at that relationship, that past relationship that you've had, and remember the good times, you know, as well as the mistakes that you've made, and carry those learning experiences into the next relationship that you have, or, you know, the next life situation that you have. But the idea of failure is interesting to me. You know, I think it's also like, the one thing I'm thinking of is this. So I'm real clumsy. Anybody in my personal life knows that. I'm constantly dropping stuff or breaking stuff, and I'm just real clumsy, right? And, you know, today I was bringing in plants from the back patio that are dead. Summer's over, and it's time to throw them out. And so I was taking them through, and like one of the plants fell, and then there was like leaves everywhere and dirt. And you know, like 5 years ago, I would have, like, that would have completely like frazzled my day. I would have been like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I just don't anymore, you know? Getting up, you know, every day with peace and serenity, and just looking at the day that way. I try not to get, I'm not gonna say that I'm perfect in this, because I'm not, you know? I mean, the opposite side of failure is perfection, and there's no such thing as perfection. And that's kind of why I don't necessarily believe in failure as well. But in anything that I'm attempting to do, you know, like, I don't get myself real frazzled and out of control. I don't allow myself to kind of like go in deep with all of that, you know, the way that I would before. I'm like, it's kind of like, don't cry over spilt milk. I used to always cry over spilt milk, and I don't anymore. I just kind of like, there were some things I had to take care of today, some phone calls that I had to make, you know, and I just kind of sat down and like made the phone calls, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, one wait time that I had was 61 minutes, you guys. I was like 61 minutes, and then it gave me some options that they could call you back and whatever. I was like, let them call me back, and then I'll take the call then, and whatever I'm doing, you know. And it's like, I just don't allow myself to get so frustrated with it anymore, and I think that's been probably one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned, you know, in the last couple years is, you know, the whole idea. I mean, and this is something that I learned in like junior high. Do you remember those posters in junior high and elementary class? It was like, life is 10% of what happens to us and 90% attitude or whatever, you know? And And I think that's so true, though. And so I've learned that finally at 47. I've learned, how to, maybe address this idea of failure, or this idea of mistakes. Because, like I said, I don't love the word failure. Because I don't think that everything is a complete failure. If you make a mistake or you screw up and you see that as a failure, right? But then you learn from it and you grow from it, and then you learn to do whatever it is that you wanted to do that you failed at the first time, so to speak, and then you eventually master that skill, or you realize that wasn't something you should be doing in the begin with because you're just not adept at those kinds of things. And then, over time, you grow, you learn, you're not as hard on yourself, you learn to go into things with peace and serenity, then really it's a growing experience, and really it's a success, not a failure. So, I don't know, I struggle with that, I look at the overall picture, I don't just look at the one incident of what happened, and, I think that, for much of that, now there's exceptions to this rule, there's always exceptions to this rule, but, I think that we have to learn, from the mistakes that we've made, and that's our choice, I come in contact with people all the time that just don't choose to learn from the mistakes that they've made, and I did that at one point in my life too, and I don't do it with everything. It's interesting to me today when a lesson is repeated, because I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize that was a lesson, and now it's being repeated, so I chose to ignore it the first time, which is why it's being repeated, because I believe that lessons are repeated until they are learned. So, for me, it's interesting because I'm like, okay, well, I didn't even recognize that this was a lesson. I guess this is a lesson. It's kind of, but even then I look at it and I'm like, this is a reminder, this is a reminder to me of something that I should be learning, and something I should be, gaining in my life through this journey. And it's not just the one incident of something that you failed, It's like, okay, when you go in and you study for like some huge test that you're going to take, and you have to have this test, whether it's like, the, MCATs for medical school, is that what it's called, the MCATs, I think, or the LSAT, or, the the GED, or the GRE, or whatever, and you go in and you fail it the first time. Well, that's pretty overwhelming, isn't it, to fail a test like that? And you can just say, you know what, I'm not meant to do this, I'm not meant to do that, and just walk away. Or you can say, okay, what did I learn from this? Am I not studying correctly? Am I not focusing my attention on this? Am I not making it a priority in my life? Should I? Am I not prioritizing the important things in my life? Is that the lesson I'm supposed to be taking from this? And there can be so many lessons, right? So everything in life that is offered to us could be a lesson. It could be learning experience. And I choose to live my life like that today, and looking at it and seeing, well, what's the lesson today? What's the thing that I can learn from this, Who wants to look at their life as just a bunch of failure? Not me. I choose not to do that. So, all right, let's look at the next meditation. I really want to read from Healing After Loss, but it's so specific about grieving, typically. So let's look on here, September 9th, and see what today's is. I just really, really like this meditation book, and I don't read from it often. Well, okay, September 9th. On the wings of time, grief flies away. La Fontaine. There are many variations of this theme, that time is a great healer, that time heals all things. Yes and no. If one is able to process one's grief in a healthy, open way, then yes, time will certainly ease the pain. If one tries to bypass the grief, or is unable to work, I was just having this conversation with somebody last night, you guys, this is so bizarre. Time will certainly ease the pain. If one tries to bypass the grief, or is unable to work through its multiple strands, in time may simply cover over grief so that it never has a chance to heal. Then trouble will ensue. Depression, fear of relationships, frenetic activity, who knows what. And even if one proceeds through grief with the utmost wisdom, the figure of grief flying away seems a total exaggeration. Crawling, maybe, or plotting. How much time before one begins to really feel better depends on the nature of the loss, the age of the person, the closeness of the relationship, the circumstances of death. Grief groups in which people have common experience can be a great help. They provide a safe place to grieve openly and help evaluate in an accepting, non-threatening way whether their members are moving along or have somehow got stuck and need extra assistance. Years from now, I may agree grief flies away in time, but don't push me. And I think that's the whole idea of grieving at your own rate, But what's so interesting about this, and I was having this conversation last night with a friend of mine, and we were talking about a friend of ours whose boyfriend had passed, and that it's been a couple years and she's really wanting to date and she's really struggling, and they were in a very serious relationship. And, I said, well, I'll say what I said in a second as a suggestion. But this whole idea of, I said this first, you know, how much time before one begins to really feel better depends on the nature of the loss, the age of the person, the closeness of the relationship, the circumstances of the death. And, you know, I think that's the one thing that we can never compare two people's griefs or two persons, you know, grieving process, because it's so completely specific and different. Like, I've talked about this a lot. It's like, you know, like if, okay, so for me, I think everybody knows that my big, you know, grieving issue is my mother, right? Well, it has a lot to do with the condition of our relation. Well, first of all, our ages. You know, I was 35 and she was 64 when she passed. You know, how close we were. I'm an only child. We were extremely close. We were both sober, so we shared that together. You know, and when she passed, we didn't have anything that we hadn't said to each other. There was really nothing left unsaid. And we both were on good standing, unlike a lot of relationships, you know. We were very, very close. And I think that has, all of that, you know, has to do with being a son versus being a daughter, being a mother versus being a father, you know, the age gap between us, all that kind of stuff, you know, living in the same town. I mean, there are 100 different variables that you can go in and explain somebody's grief. And then how do you compare your grief to somebody else's or theirs to somebody else's? You can't, you know. It's so specific and unique. But I was saying to my friend, she was like, you know, what would you say to her, you know, having gone through a similar situation where you've lost somebody that's really, really important to you? Because apparently she's getting on like dating apps and things like that. And I said, you know what I would say to her is, or she said she's always looking. You can tell she's always looking. And I said, you know what I would tell her is, you know, she's not going to take a year. Like, that's what we recommend in recovery, you know, is take a year to yourself and just focus on yourself before you get into a relationship. But what I said was, if she could take 6 months to find a counselor that she really, really trusted, and she has the ability, she has the financial means to do this, and then go see that counselor or therapist or life coach or whatever twice a week, and then get into some kind of grief group, and then say, for the next 6 months, I'm not going to get on any dating apps, I'm not going to meet anybody. If somebody comes along and it's a possibility, then yes, I will entertain that. Once I, you know, pass that by my, she's not in recovery, so it's not a sponsor person, but once I pass that by my counselor or whoever, you know, and then, but for the next 6 months, I'm just going to focus on myself and my grieving process, and I'm going to allow myself that time. And then when 6 months comes, I will evaluate again whether I want to, you know, move through this and start dating again, or, you know, whether I want to continue to work on myself for a little bit longer. But to just give yourself that time, you know, like, and I don't think we do that. And when I talk about my grieving with my mom, one of the things I've talked about on here is, you know, that I was really, really numb for like that first year. And then Alex came along, and it's really interesting because I used to have this blog and I was writing on it, and then it kind of stopped around the time that I met Alex. And a lot of those blogs were about my mom and things like that. And then I started it up again down the road. But so I always thought that was funny. That was like Alex entered my life, and then that whole thing kind of like, you know, our relationship, that helped me kind of move through the grief a little bit, because then I was into something else. I was, you know, my attention was on something else. And then when I came back to going to meetings, you know, 4 years later or whatever, 3.5 years later from the time that we met, was when I started really sharing in meetings how I felt about my mom and crying and all that kind of stuff, you know, to the point where people were like, are you still going to talk? You know what I mean? Are you going to continue to talk about your mom? Yeah, I'll talk about her as long as I want. She was my mom and she's gone, and we had a close relationship, and I have lots to say about it. So I'm going to continue to talk about it as long as I want. Like this person says on here, years from now, I may agree grief flies away in time, but don't push me, you know? I don't want to be fixated on it. I don't want to be stuck in it. But do I want to give myself permission to talk about it when I want to? Yes, absolutely, and I do. But I think that you have to allow yourself that time to grow and change. And the one thing that we don't really talk about, you know, with grief is that, like, you know, my mom was the person that I called on just some random movie that was coming out, you know, or some book that I had found or read. I would just call her up and be like, hey mom, blah, blah, blah. I mean, she was my go-to person for that, you know. We talked about sobriety. We sat around, we, you know, drank coffee all the time and just talked and just, you know, all that. And I didn't really understand what unconditional love was until she was gone. And, you know, the one thing that we don't talk about is what our lives look like with that person not in there anymore, you know? And then how selfish we become out of like anger and denial and the stages of grief that we talk about, that we really miss that person and they're not there. And it's us kind of like refiguring our whole life out again. And it feels like we have no ground to stand on for a while. Because, you know, I mean, with a parent, at least I can say, you know, I had her in my life my entire life. So then all of a sudden she's not there. I mean, it totally reevaluated my life. It totally like, refigured my life. when it's a spouse or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever, I think, to be with that person and then they're gone, and that doesn't have to only be, through death or passing. It can also be in breaking up. It's like, that person was in your life every single day. I mean, they were your friend, they were your lover, they were, whatever, your partner, they shared space with you, and then all of a sudden they're gone like that. You don't really know what to do with your life moving forward, and I think it's really tough, So I think it's about being patient and being compassionate with yourselves. And also when you see somebody else going through it, being patient and compassionate with them as well, and not pushing them too hard to move on. Because we don't believe in that. We believe in moving through. So anyway, I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.